So now we're at the point in the video where we're going to show you how to use the special service tool that I bought from that guy on I Hate Mud. He actually provides you a couple pages right out of the factory service manual in relation to utilizing this tool. First thing you got to do is get the axle seal out, which we did. I'm going to get these pieces into the inside of the axle housing. So for this application, going into the axle housing, I have to use these two sleeves. So this one's going to go on first. I'm just going to lubricate it a little bit with some grease, and then I'm going to slide it inside. Next, I'm going to slide this one into the first one, and then I'm going to slide this one inside, and this tip is actually the piece that's going to scribe a line on the shaft of the tool. Now the next step that I have the tool on the inside of the axle housing, I have to get this rod with the bearings on it all installed correctly. So remember, I needed to utilize some custom made bushings to make this tool work with the 25mm bearings that I'm using. I'm going to slide the bushing inside the inside diameter of the bearing, and then I'm going to put this one in the upper section. Put a little bit of grease on here to make sure that it will spin fairly smoothly. And I'll put a little bit on the inside of the race, and I'll plop that one in place. I'm going to do the same with the bottom one. I'm going to slide the bushing that I got made into there. To assemble the tool, you have two of these pieces. I'm going to slide this piece on first with the flange facing downward, and then I'm going to put my bearing onto the shaft, and I'm going to put a little bit more grease on this, a little bit inside of the race, and then I'm going to slide it up into position like so. The next thing that goes on is this other one. It's the exact sister of this one. Slide that on. Then we have to get this arm in place, put that on, and then we finally put our upper nut on. What we learned on the other side is that when you're tensioning this nut to get the proper preload on the bearings, these things will want to turn. You have to offset them to where when you get the proper preload, both of these open faces will be facing the same direction, so you could take a measurement with the caliper tool. Right now I have one facing outward towards the tire and another one facing inboard towards the third member. I'm going to get on the bottom bolt head with a 19mm, and then I'm just going to use an adjustable wrench on the top, and I'm going to tighten this up. Now when you think you got it pretty close, you have to take a measurement with your fish scale tool. I'm going to hook this onto the end of this arm, pull perpendicular, grabbing this little ring, and see how much preload there is. Okay, so that was a little bit much. That actually came out to almost 17, so let me back this off a little bit. Let's try that again. Reset your tool. That actually got it only to 12, so we have to be a little bit tighter than that. We're shooting for a preload of 15 pounds. That's almost there, a little bit tighter. That's about 14, just a tiny bit tighter. I'm just going to go a little bit more. It's almost 15. And that's now right at 15. So when you're pulling this, you stop pulling with the tool as soon as you see movement. As soon as I see just a tiny little bit of movement in the arm, letting me know that the bearings are finally breaking free, that's where you stop, and then you take a look at your measurement. So we're right at 15 pounds now. Now what we need to do is grab a caliper tool, and we need to measure between these two flat surfaces on these parts of the tool. So I have the caliper tool pretty straight in line with the shaft to make sure I get an accurate measurement. The caliper tool is showing a distance of 166.6. According to the factory service manual, this is going to be our A reading. The next measurement we have to take is from this top edge to this bottom edge. This is going to be our B measurement, B as in boy. So open the caliper up and let's measure this distance. I'm getting a reading of 165.1. So this is a page out of the factory service manual that came with a special service tool, and we took these measurements. This one here, which is the A value, and then this one on the knuckle, which is the B value. The total shim thickness, C value, is equal to A minus B. So the measurements we had, the special service tool measurement and the knuckle measurement, those were 166.6 and 165.1. The difference between those is 1.5. If everything worked correctly with the special service tool, we should be able to use a total shim thickness of 1.5 millimeters, and that should get us to the 15 pounds of preload we want to end up with. What we found on the opposing side, we came up with a similar value. We came up with needing 1.5 millimeters of shim thickness. When we utilized that amount of shim thickness, we didn't come up with the preload that we wanted. It was way undervalued. It was only like about 7 pounds. So we ended up having to lessen the amount of shim thickness to finally get to where we wanted to. And what we figured out for that other side is that we ended up with 0.3 millimeter shim on the top and 0.5 on the bottom for a total of 0.8. So about half of what we came up with. So from that experience, we're not even going to bother starting with 1.5. We're going to start with the 0.8. But before we put the shims on and put the arms back on, we're going to do the alignment portion of the special service tool next to see where we need to put more thickness on the top or more thickness on the bottom to get a better alignment of everything. I'm going to take some of the steel blue layout fluid. You got to shake it up a little bit, and then I'm just going to spray some into the cap. Next, I'm just going to take a little paintbrush, get some on there, and I'm going to clean off these old marks, basically paint over them. Just going to let that dry a little bit. Now that the layout fluid has dried onto the shaft of the tool, I have to utilize both my hands for this next thing. I have to grab the scribe tool and pull it up against the rod so it will scribe a mark while I'm turning this upper lever. So I got it pushed forward pretty far. I'm going to grab the scribe tool, it's against the rod, and I'm going to now turn it. And I'll go back one more time. As you can see, it made a nice clear mark of where the scribe hit the shaft of the special service tool. The next thing we have to do is we have to take the special service tool off here, and then we have to install it onto the knuckle with also the knuckle spindle to make the next mark. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the knuckle spindle attached back to the knuckle because we need this connected there for our next alignment. This is going to slide in like so on the inside. So we're just going to put this on with a couple bolts. And then I'm just going to get another one in the opposing side. I'm going to cinch these nuts up just barely snug. Okay, those are both snugged up. I'm going to insert the tool with the scribe on the inside here. And then now we have to get the special service tool installed in the same orientation. What I mean by the same orientation is we came up from the bottom with the bolt head of the special service tool, and we're going to do the same thing. So these studs are the top, and the ones we just removed are on the bottom. We don't need the bearings anymore for this part of it, so you can get the bearings out of your way. This piece right here slides right into the knuckle, just like so. You slide in the bolt through the bottom, and then we're going to put the opposing adapter on the top. Next, we're going to get the nut in place. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use my left hand to pull the scribe tool against the shaft, and then I'm just going to rotate the head of the bolt counterclockwise. I notice if I try to go clockwise, it gets too tight. So I'm just going to keep pressure to where I got the rod in the exact position it should be. I'm not going to let it come out this way, and I'm just going to turn it lefty-loosey and scribe a mark. So now you can see we have our two marks that we need to do this alignment measurement. I'm going to take the tool off, make sure that I don't mess up those lines that we need to take a measurement from. Now that we have both lines scribed on the tool, we take a measurement with our caliper, and the distance between those two scribed lines is right about 3 millimeters. So that's our D value. The formula for the lower shim thickness is E equals D minus 3 millimeters. It shows it right here on the factory service manual page. So basically what we came up with is that there's going to be no need for a shim on the lower part of the knuckle. All the shim thickness is going to have to go on the upper one. That's going to be our F value. The upper shim thickness is F value, so F is going to equal C minus E. The E value is 0. That means we're going to have to use the total shim thickness on the upper, which is going to be 1.5 millimeters. So I'll write it out. F equals C minus the E value, which is 0. This value was 1.5. We're going to have to put 1.5 millimeters of shim thickness on the top. But like we said, from what we learned from the other side, we noticed that 1.5 ended up being too much shim to get the proper preload. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put a 0.8 shim on the top and put the knuckle back together, see if it gets us to that magic number of 15 pounds of preload. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get our Marlin Crawler Eco Seal. You can see it looks a lot different than an OEM seal, and they're supposedly really well made and will last a long time. So I'm just going to use a little grease on here to help with the insertion. And then you'll notice that this has a lip to it. You only drive it in as far as you can to where this lip hits the inside of the axle housing, and then you know you're done. So you don't have to worry about inserting it too far. I'm also going to put a little grease on the inside of the axle housing here. And now I'm just going to place the seal in there with my hand, get it started. The tool I'm going to use is a seal installer. It also works to install races if you flip this around. But I'm going to use this flat side and knock it in with the ball peen hammer. Just take a look in there, make sure the seal lip is fully flush with the inside of the axle housing, and you're done. So now we're going to get some of these parts on before we get the knuckle on. Remember, the felt slid off last, and what I did is, because this felt is pretty much a very good wicking material, I rubbed in a bunch of the bearing grease in here to where, say if I go through water or mud, this thing isn't going to get soaked with a bunch of dirt because I've now impregnated it with a bunch of grease. So I'm going to slide this over. You could be a little bit rough with it. You don't have to worry about tearing it too much. Okay, there we go. The next thing we need to slide on is this rubber gasket. Stretch that over. Next, we're going to get the split ring on there. It's going to bend on you a little bit. Just bend it back as best you can. And then all this stuff is just going to sit back there for right now. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to pack these wheel bearings. A lot of times what people do is they just put a big glob of grease on their hand and they work it in there until they see grease popping out. They just work it in there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this bearing greaser. You put grease on the bottom. You have this plunger. Take it out so you can see it. You have the plunger with an O-ring on the outside. So you pack a bunch of grease in there and then you stick your plunger down in here. And this part unscrews. You can pull that off and then you put the bearing in with the tapered side facing down. Then you grab this, you put it over the top and you push down and it pushes the grease in. Got to give it a decent amount of pressure. And you can see in there that the grease has popped out on all areas. So you can see how it's squeezed out through the top. Now I'm just going to take that stuff on the top and put it around the circumference. And I'm going to even put more. Layer it on pretty thick. And then I'm going to drop it in to this upper race. I'm going to do the same with the bottom one. Now I could stick this into the lower race and most likely, just because of the tackiness of the grease, it's not going to move on me, but I'm going to keep an eye on it in case it gets ready to fall out. But it's in there pretty good. The reason why I'm smushing the grease in here, because ultimately I'm going to be packing this with grease anyways, so I may as well just scrape it off in here. I've got the knuckle all cleaned up. Remember, the studs are now on the top. The ones we removed are on the bottom. I'm going to slide it over both bearings. Now I'm just going to let it hang out there, hopefully. Now, you sat through and watched us do all these fancy calculations with the special service tool I bought from the guy on IHateMud.com, and we came up with the fact that we really don't need any shims on the bottom. We should put all of our shim thickness on the top. You also heard us say that using the special service tool on the passenger side didn't work out to get the right preload for the Knuckle, so we had to basically cut it in half. What we're going to do is we're going to do something similar what we did to the other side. We're going to half the amount. So we came up with 1.5. We have shims that are about 0.45 to 0.5, and we have other shims that are about 0.28 to 0.3, depending on the measurement you take on it. We're going to put a thicker shim on the top and then a thinner shim on the bottom. Now you're going to be saying, why are you going to put any shim on the bottom? Shouldn't you be putting all the shims on the top? According to our calculations, yes, that would be correct. We should be putting all the shims on the top. But here's the deal. I don't know 100% that the calculations using that aftermarket special service tool came out correctly. And from reading and doing a lot of research on this subject, most people don't even do what we did by using a special service tool. They just put an equal width shim on the top, an equal width shim on the bottom, and call it good. They don't even worry about the alignment. And because most people get away with that, I'm thinking that I don't know if I want to just 100% follow the result that we got with that tool, because what if it's off? What I'm going to do is what everybody else does, is I'm going to put a shim on the top and a shim on the bottom. I am going to put the thicker of the two on the top. So I'm going to put a 0.5 on the top and a 0.3 on the bottom. I'm going to lubricate the pin a little bit with some grease. I'm going to put some on the inside of the diameter of the bearing also. I'm going to get my 0.5 shim. I'm going to slide it over the studs, get the knuckle in place, hold it in an alignment with the bearing, and then I'm going to slide this cap over. And it should slide in with relative ease if I get everything lined up right. There we go. It's pretty much lined up. I'm going to now get my cone washers and put the cone washers in there. I got all the cone washers on there. What Sean and I figured out the last time is we can drive these cone washers down into place with a 13 millimeter socket. So a short 13. Okay, all the cone washers are bottomed out. And now I'm going to get the washers and the nuts on. Now that we have the top arm started, we're going to get the bottom one started. So I'm going to put the thinner shim down here, have one of my Allen head bolts ready. I'm going to put a little grease on these surfaces. Okay, it's all nice and lubricated. Let's see if we could slide this in. And that went in pretty good. I'll get one of the bolts started. And I'll get the other three started. These have a 10 millimeter Allen head. I'm going to cinch these up, but not all the way. Okay, those are started pretty good. And now we have to choose a side, which side we're going to torque first. I don't think it matters, but we're going to go ahead and start with the top. I'm just slowly bringing these down evenly. Okay, these are all cinched up. Now I'm going to transition to the torque wrench. The torque spec for these upper bearing cap or knuckle arm, whatever you want to call it, 71 foot-pounds. Same with the bottom. I'm going to torque them to 71 foot-pounds. When you're trying to torque this thing is going to want to turn on you, so you're going to have to put a lot of pressure. So what we learned is if we get the steering arm back connected, this will lock things up for us to where I can just use the torque wrench and not have to worry about holding this steady. Okay, I think they're all now at 71 foot-pounds. I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom. I'm going to torque them to 71 foot-pounds utilizing the 10 millimeter Allen socket. Double check. Okay, now we're going to take this tie rod out. I'm just getting a feeling of what it feels like. It feels pretty similar to the other side, but we'll know now. We're going to get our fish scale on here and pull to see how much preload we have. So the result was way high. It was like over 27 pounds. What we found on the other side didn't work out, so we have to increase the shim thickness to get the preload down. So we're gonna have to take this apart and put different shims in and figure it out. Okay, we did a lot of trial and error to get the preload set right. We got a 0.5 millimeter shim on the bottom and a 1 millimeter shim on the top, and the preload came in at about 14. And I really would like to be at least 15 because of the big tires I'm running. So then we changed the upper shim to a 0.8 and kept the lower shim the same as 0.5 for an overall shim thickness of 1.3, and that got us to the value of about 17 preload. I think I'd rather go for a little bit higher than 15 than lower than 15, because I really want to get rid of that death wobble that I've been getting. So you can see that it started moving and it's basically right at about the 17. I don't know if this is the right call or not, but I think it is, to go a little bit higher than rather than a little bit lower than the 15-pound value that I was shooting for. So other videos like the one from Low Range Off-Road show that you can basically take apart this whole Burfield joint, and I don't want to do that. It sounds like a lot of work. You could also separate this shaft. This main shaft that slides into the axle housing, it has a C-clip that allows it to lock into place inside this joint. You could either capture the shaft in a vise and then take a brass drift and pound on it to free it. The other way I've seen that they separate it is they get a piece of pipe that's longer than the shaft that's gonna fit this diameter and hit this part of the Burfield joint, and then they just slam it down and this will pop the C-clip free inside, and then they can take it apart further and re-grease it. I'm gonna cheat a little bit and I'm just gonna let gravity help me, and I'm just wiping out some of this old mixture of grease and gear oil. I'm gonna get it pretty clean and call it good. And then after I get it pretty darn clean, then I'm gonna pack it with fresh grease. So if you decided to pull the shaft out, like I showed you how you can do it with a piece of pipe, or you capture this in a vise and pound it off, you get some grease and you shoot it on the inside of this Burfield joint, and then when you stick the shaft back in, a lot of the grease is going to squirt up into place. Because I didn't do that, I'm just going to manually pack this, getting grease and just smearing it in here, and work the joint around and just keep on doing that. Rotate it, smash grease in there, because this is basically like a CV joint. When you do a CV joint repacking, you don't take the whole thing apart and take the shaft out. You just pack it with grease and call it good. So that's why I'm going to do it this way. Make less work for myself. I'm just going to work it around a little bit. So now that I have the Burfield joint greased up really good, I'm going to take some more grease and I'm going to put a little bit of grease on the inside of the seal here, the seal lip. I'm doing that just so the shaft of the axle has an easier time sliding through the seal. It's not going to do any damage to the seal when I slide it in. Make sure the shaft is nice and clean, and then we'll slide it in. Now remember, you have these flat sections, so these flat sections have to be oriented with the bearing caps. You might have to turn the front drive shaft a little bit to get it in further. So I'm going to reach in, see if I can grab the shaft while pushing on this, turn it to get in a better alignment. To make it easier for me, since the drive shaft is so far away from me, it's a long reach, he's going to turn that drive shaft back and forth a little bit while I'm trying to push this thing in. It's not really lining up very well, is it? Something's not right. Oh, it's heavy because it's got to be picked up a little bit. A lot of pressure's on the seal on this left side. You have to lever it on the seal to get it in. So you could support it so far, and then it gets stuck at that point. turn it a little bit. Fuck, I don't know how I got it. Turn it a little bit. There we go. So here's the deal with this side. The passenger side didn't fight me as much because the shaft length that goes on the passenger side is much shorter, so you don't have as much weight. So what I learned is when I inserted it into the axle housing, the weight of the shaft is bringing the shaft down. It's not ideal, but I don't know how else you do it. You actually have to lever against the seal to pick up the end of the shaft so where it'll slide in further. And then you saw I got it pretty close to going in, but then it fought me again, and again I had to kind of push a little downward pressure, wiggle it up and down, and finally it slid in a little bit further. And then the last trick was Sean helped me by turning the drive shaft back and forth a little bit to align the splines on the other end, and it finally slid in. Not so easy on this driver's side because of the longer shaft. It's much easier on the passenger side. Now that we have the axle in place, we're going to get these parts on the back side of the knuckle in. So first we have to get the split ring into the knuckle, and there's a space for it to go in. There's like a little groove in there. Just got to feed it in all the way around. Turn the knuckle as you need to. I don't know if you have to actually have both sides of the split ring fully recessed, meaning that they meet up end to end. I think they're going to overlap a little bit. I don't know if you could actually get it to where it snaps in place. I think it's meant to just overlap on the ends. So now I'm going to get the rubber seal in place, smooth it out on there, and then the felt seal. So the felt seal has these flat sections top and bottom, and those correspond to the flat sections of the knuckle. The felt also has some holes in it. You can't really see them very well right now because it's all full of grease, but there's little holes here for the bolts to go through. The convex side faces towards the felt seal. So I'm going to get this in place, and then I'm going to get one of the bolts started. So I got to find that hole in the felt, then line that up with the knuckle. Got one started. Now I'm going to get the other one started for this upper half of the seal retainer. I got the top section in. Now I'm going to put the bottom section. These bolts are a 10 millimeter. I couldn't find a torque spec for these, and I'm not really too worried about it. I'm just going to choke up on a little 1/4 inch drive ratchet with a 10 millimeter socket and just get them nice and snug. I'm now going to pack the knuckle area with the bearing grease that I'm going to use. I've seen videos where the person doesn't even pack this. What they do is they take this 1/2 inch plug out, and then they just squeeze a couple 8-ounce tubes inside. The factory service manual says that you should fill this void 3/4 full. It's a little bit of guesswork. You just gotta eyeball it. I'm just gonna grab big handfuls of grease and start smushing it in there. And I'm gonna be smushing it in between the burr field and the end of the axle housing, and then I'm gonna be also smushing it in between the knuckle and the end of the axle housing. So I'm gonna move it different ways and just start shoving grease in there. And I'm gonna call that good because you see this area right here, when the hub spindle goes over, this is gonna be a void right here with no grease in it. I'm guessing that's about 1/4, maybe a little more than 1/4. I could always add a little more by taking that plug out, like I said, and squeezing more in there. But I'm a little worried that I'm gonna run out of grease for the wheel bearings in the hub, so I'm not gonna go any further right now. Now we're gonna work on servicing the hub. The first thing we're gonna do is gonna get this grease seal out of the way. It's on the back side of the hub. I've got a couple 4x6s that I'm gonna use to support it. Gonna get it in between, like so. Gonna get like a medium length pry bar, get underneath the lip, and then I'm just gonna pop down and pop this sucker out. Might have to hit it in a few sections. There we go. When it flips up and gets grease all over you, you know you're succeeded. Now we can get the inner bearing out, which is the bigger of the two bearings. So I'm just gonna get in here with a rag and clean up all this really good. Now that this is cleaned up pretty good, we're gonna knock these races out, just like we knocked the races out on the ends of the axle housing. we have to hit them out from the inside out. These have little cutouts to where you can get a punch on there and knock them out. What happened on the first side is I wasn't very careful with the punch, and I ended up scoring the inside surface where the race slides into. So I'm going to try to be a little more careful this time and not let the punch glance off the race and hit the inside diameter. At least that's what I'm hoping. So there's actually 4 cutouts for these races, so you could hit in all 4 corners. And we finally have it out. We got the first side out. Now we flipped it over and we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna utilize our big punch and we're gonna knock it on all 4 sides, slowly driving it out. Trying to make sure we're not gonna damage the inside of the surface that the race sits into. Last time I wasn't very careful and I scored it up a little bit with this punch. So this time I was a little more careful and I didn't make any marks on it. And that one went out really easy. So now we have both races, and you can see one's bigger than the other. So this one is for the outside bearing, this one's for the inside bearing. I'm going to start with the larger race because I'm on the back side currently. Remember, there's 2 distinct sides. You really can't mess this up unless you're just not paying attention, but this side that has a bigger flat side, that goes inside the hub because the bearing's going to fit in with the beveled side facing towards you. I'm just going to grease the inside of the hub a little bit to make the insertion a little bit easier. And then I'm going to put a little grease on the outside of the race. And then I'm going to plop it in here. And then I'm going to first get it started with the brass hammer. So I got my brass hammer and I'm just going to tap it and try to get it started. Once I get it started, I'm just going to go in circles and get it to where it's even with the hub. Okay, now it's even with the hub, and now I got to drive it in further. And what I saw in that low range off-road video is they took one of the old races and they put it on a belt sander and they sanded down the diameter a little bit to where then they could use this as their driving tool, because by taking a little bit of the diameter off, it's not going to get stuck. But I have this press sleeve kit and I have all these different diameter press sleeves that I could utilize. So I found that one of the press sleeves in my kit, it's labeled D80 by D70. I put that on there, and then I have this cap that goes with the press sleeve kit, fit that on there. And then now I could just take my brass hammer and I can drive to where I drive this fully seated. When you get that solid sound, you're most likely done. But the way we double check is we flip it over and then we see that the race is bottomed out on the lip, and you have those little cutouts that you could utilize to get a better look, and it does look like it's fully bottomed out now. Now we're going to work on the outer race. Again, lubricate the surface that it's going to go into, and then also lubricate the outside of the race. Set it in there. This one's a little easier because it actually recesses a little bit right from the start, so it's a little easier to get the alignment. I'm going to utilize a different diameter press sleeve from my kit. Set that on there, put the top cap on there, and then again with the ball peen hammer, I'm going to hammer this home. I think we're done. We'll flip it over and double check. You have to wipe the grease away. I could see from the cutouts that it's fully seated. I'm now going to pack the wheel bearings. I'm going to use the grease packer tool, so I'm going to plop it down in there. Put the shaft over here, and then push down with a decent amount of force to work the grease in there. Okay, I see it all squirting up out of all the parts of the bearing. I'm going to take the excess, I'm going to roll it around the outside, work the grease in better, get the bearing to turn a little bit, work it in there, put a big blob on the outside, and then I'm going to drop this in. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the rear grease seal in place. It's got two distinct sides. So you see the side with the little rubber lip, that side faces up and this other side faces inboard. I'm just going to drop this in, and I've seen where people utilizes one of the old bearing races to knock it in place. Another guy did this technique, and I kind of like this technique. Just take a ball peen hammer and start tapping it in, get it started, and then just work your way around getting it flush with the housing. Once you get it started, just go around in circles. You want your ball peen hammer overlapping, so when you get it completely flush, you're not going to be able to get it any further. If you were inboard like this, you could drive it in too far, because you don't want the seal to be contacting the bearing. You want the bearing to be able to spin. I'm overlapping. Hear the difference in the sound? Now I'm contacting the hub. And that's in enough. The bearing still moves. We're good to go. So now the factory service manual says this void between the two bearings, you're supposed to pack some grease in there, kind of fill it up. I'm just going to dip my fingers in here and just start packing some grease in this void. I'd say that's good enough. I made enough of a mess in there. And then now I'm going to pack the outer wheel bearing. I'm going to put this in there. Squeeze away here. Well, it looks like I just had barely enough grease here. We're not going to drop it in just yet. We have to get the spindle on first, and then we put this in afterwards. So we'll just set this here for right now. Now we're going to get all these gaskets and the spindle in place and the other parts in place. This one with a square side, and a bottom square side. This one goes on like so. But what I'm going to do is, because a lot of things have to line up. Now I did see a guy who used a little bit of Permatex, little gasket sealer to keep it in place. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put it on here, and then I'm going to get the next one in place. This one goes like this, with that little open end facing this part right here. Then next might be your brake dust shield, but I have this thing and it says up. I'm going to put that on there next. And then finally, when it comes to getting this last piece in place, you'll notice that the two upper holes that should face up are closer together than these two bottom ones. Another dead giveaway is this old one says which side is up and which side is bottom, so we can compare those two and get it in the right orientation. More space between those two bottom holes. I'm going to put it over the top, and then I'm going to slide a bolt through. Then I'm going to get another one across from it. So now you'll see that I have the inner gasket, another gasket on the other side, that round plate, and then finally this one all captured. I'll slide it onto the spindle, and then I'll get one of the bolts started. That one started, I'll get this one started. Now I can get all the rest of them started. I'm going to cinch all these bolts up with a 17mm socket and 3/8 ratchet. Just do it evenly. The torque spec for these 17mm bolts is 38 foot-pounds, so I'm just going to slowly bring it up to the torque spec. It's always good to use a crossing pattern. That hit the torque spec. think they're all at the torque spec. I'm just going to double check now. Okay, they're all at 38 foot-pounds. We're finally ready to put the hub on. This grease seal is going to be contacting this part of the spindle. I'm going to put a little bit of grease on here and then also on the rubber seal. I'm also going to put some grease on this one because this seal seals up right up against this surface right here. I'm going to make that a little bit slick. Hopefully it'll last a little longer. And then I'm also going to put a little bit on this outside surface too. So pick this sucker up, slide it on. Now we have to get our outer bearing in place. We already packed it. I'm going to smear a big blob of grease on the outside. We're going to slide it inside. Just wipe a little of the excess that's smushed out here. Got an overload of grease here. But basically you want it as packed as good as you possibly can, because ideally you're not going to be redoing this for a long time, hopefully. One thing that we didn't show when we first pulled the hub off and got the outer bearing out is that this thrust washer was connected to it, and I forgot about it to mention it. So when you're putting it back together, you have to put a thrust washer here. Now this is interesting because you can see that this has been grooved out by the face of the bearing, and how that happened I don't know, because when you have the right preload, the bearing should be turning like this and this shouldn't really be spinning. What this leads me to believe is that it was spinning here and it basically wore a groove into the thrust washer. I went to Toyota and got myself a brand new thrust washer because this one is pretty much wasted. You slide on the thrust washer, it's keyed, so you only could go on one way, and slide it back against the bearing. Now you have to get your adjustment nut and you have to screw that on. Okay, that's cinched down. The next step is we have to now get the proper preload for the bearings. So we're going to use our special service tool, this 54mm socket, and we're going to torque the nut to 43 foot-pounds. Okay, 43 foot-pounds. Now the factory service manual says turn it right a few turns and then turn it left a few turns. The next thing we do is we back off the nut to where it's just hand tight. Now we're going to check the preload and see where we're at. So you hook your tool, get one of the lug nut studs up at the 12 o'clock position, pull, and as soon as it starts to move, that's where you stop. So that was at about 7 pounds. The spec is you want somewhere between 6.2 pounds and 12.3 pounds. So that's within spec. So then the directions say to tighten this nut to 18 foot-pounds now. So now we're going to tighten it to 18 foot-pounds. Okay, that's at 18. Next we're going to put our lock washer on. And then we're going to put our lock nut on. So now the lock nut we torque to 33 foot-pounds. Okay, the lock nut is tightened to 33 foot-pounds, and now we're going to make sure that our preload is right. I'm going to hook this up, pull. It just started to move, and that's right at about 13. That's just a tiny bit over the spec. I'm going to turn it a few times and turn it a few times the other way, see if I can get a different number. But that's like right at the top of the spec. Okay, it just started moving. That's a little better. That's right at 11 foot-pounds. That's well within the spec between 6.2 and 12.3. So I'm going to call that good, that we have a proper preload for the hub bearings. So now we want to bend the tabs of that lock washer and capture both the lock nut and the adjustment nut. And you have 5 fins to choose from. So you have to choose the one that will go over the flat part of the nut as best as possible. So it looks like this one right here, I'm going to bend over the adjustment nut, and this one right here, I'm going to bend forward over the lock nut. So I'll start with the lock nut one. I'm just going to get behind it and bend it towards the lock nut till it's flush. I got it pretty much most of the way against the nut, but I'm just going to use a hammer and tap it the rest of the way home. Okay, that's bent over nicely over the lock nut, and then now I'm going to knock this other one over the adjustment nut. Okay, those are both knocked in place. Now that we got our bearing preload set, we're gonna get our hub body on, so we gotta get the gasket on first. Now we're gonna put our hub body on. All these parts you could disassemble further if you wanted to. You can take this whole thing apart by taking this clip out and totally clean this thing up as perfect as can be, or in a parts washer, whatever you want. But I'm not going to go through the nth degree of getting this thing perfect. I've got it pretty clean and I'm going to call it good. But what I am going to do is I'm going to put some fresh grease in here. I'm going to grease up all these slots to where the manual hub locking mechanism is going to be able to slide in and out very freely. I'm also just going to put a little bit on this backside. As you can see, this hub body can only go on one way. It's got this extra pinhole, this pin right here, and that's how you slide it on. Now that the hub body's on, I'm going to get the snap ring in place. I'm going to put it on my snap ring pliers, expand it out, and slide it over the shaft. What happened to me when I was trying to slide the C-clip in place is this shaft can move on you. There's inner threads on the shaft. It's an M8 with a 125 pitch. This is just a thread restorer, but you could just use any bolt. You can move the shaft in and out a little bit, and that might affect your ability to get the snap ring in place. So I have this in there now in case if it does move again, I could just pull it back out. So again, I'm going to try to get the snap ring in place. Went in a little bit on me again. There we go. Snapped in place. It's good to go. All right, we have the C-clip in place on the end of the shaft. Now we're going to get all 6 cone washers on the studs first. Slide them in place. And then we follow that up with the flat washer and the nut. We're going to get all 6 of these started. I have all the nuts started, and now I'm just going to slowly cinch them up. 12 millimeter. These free hub nuts are torqued to 23 foot-pounds. You need a way to steady the hub while you're tightening these up to spec. I'm going to use a couple lug nuts on a couple of the lug nut studs, and then use a pry bar in between them to kind of hold the hub assembly steady. So I'm basically going to wedge the pry bar in between the 2 lug nuts. Then now that's going to give me a way to hold it in place. And then I'm just going to go around and double check and make sure they're all there. All these nuts are torqued to 23 foot-pounds. Now it's time to get the free hub cover in place. Again, you can disassemble this further, take the dial off, clean it up better. There's a little ball bearing and a spring in there and a little O-ring, but this thing is working very smooth for me. I don't see any necessity to tear it down any further, but I did wipe up a lot of the old grease, and now I'm going to put some new grease in these channels where all these moving surfaces. So right now I have it in the lock position where this thing is expanded out a little bit. This would be the free position, so just turn it, open it up, and just put some fresh grease in all these moving parts. Take it apart a little bit more and you could get the grease in a little easier. Okay, and you see that notch right there? There's also a notch right here. To get this back together, you just push in and then turn counterclockwise, and then you could get it back in the free position like that. I'm also going to put some grease on this surface right here, and then on this inner surface where it interfaces with the hub body. Okay, that's greased up nice. You want to make sure this mechanism is all the way in the free position, so turn it counterclockwise until it's fully recessed. And then you have to figure out which way this thing goes in. With the other side, I was smart and put a little black dot on each one, limit the guesswork. Well, let's see. Oh, I got lucky on the first one. How about that? To take the guesswork out, you see these two that have a gap on either side? Well, those two go right here. So that takes the guesswork out of it. We have to get a gasket here. I'm going to take some of this slop off of here. And we're going to get this star one in place on this hub body. Just got to slide it down on there. Okay, you got your gasket in place. And now we could slide this hub dial on. Okay, that slid in. And now we got to get our little 10mm bolts in. The torque spec for these little 10mm bolts is 7 foot-pounds. But since I'm lazy and I don't want to get out my small torque wrench, I'm just going to get these tight by feel. So I got my little 1/4-inch ratchet, 10mm socket, and I'm going to cinch these up. I'm just choking up on this little 1/4-inch ratchet, cinching them up, and calling it good. They're all tight. And now let's see to make sure that this thing is working properly. So it's in the free mode right now. I'm going to turn it to lock, and there it locked it up. And you'll be able to see in the background there the drive shaft turning. I'll go back to free. And sometimes you have to just back off a little bit and it frees it up. We'll go back to lock again. There it is, free. It's free. So it's working. Okay, you've got everything back together. Before you get your brake caliper back on, you want to clean up both sides of your rotor because you've been touching it with greasy hands. So just use some brake cleaner, whatever brand you got. And then I'll get the other side. For this other side, I'm going to use one hand to spray and the other to turn. Okay, our rotor's clean, and now we're going to get our caliper back on. You got to hold the caliper with one hand while you align the bolt with your other. Okay, I got the top one started. I'm going to get the bottom one started. These caliper bolts are 19mm. I'm just going to cinch them up with my 3/8 ratchet. The torque spec for these 19mm caliper bolts is 65 foot-pounds. Okay, both caliper bolts are torqued to 65 foot-pounds. Now I got to get the brake line reconnected. I've got the flexible brake line through the bracket, but I'm not going to put the little clip in first because this might make it a little bit harder to get the two connected. So I'm going to leave the clip off right now. I'm going to take my little vacuum cap off of the line, and then I'm going to take my silicone plug out of the flexible line and then get ready to reconnect them as quick as possible without losing a lot of brake fluid. Okay, I got them both connected, and now I'm going to get the clip in place. You want the little hooked side facing you or facing outward. Slide it in place, and then you could use a hammer and a screwdriver or a little pry tool to knock it in. Okay, that's fully seated. I'm going to grab my flex head 10mm flare nut wrench and tighten up the connection. There is a torque spec for this, but I'm just going by feel. You want it snug to where it's not going to leak, but you don't want to over tighten it either. And that's good. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get our steering arm back in place. And I did mark them driver and passenger side rear so I wouldn't mess up. So I'm just going to slide these into the arms. We have the arm back in to both upper bearing caps or steering arms, wherever you want to call it. We're going to get our castle nut back on. And then we're going to torque this castle nut to 67 foot-pounds. Okay, 67 foot-pounds. Now we just got to see if the hole for the cotter pin lines up. If you find once you hit the torque spec that the hole for the cotter pin isn't lining up, turn it a little bit tighter, not looser, to line up the hole. You don't want to go looser than the spec, but it's okay to go a little bit higher. So I just have to go a little bit more to line up the hole. Just go a little bit at a time and make sure you don't go past it. You need to go just a little bit more. Now it looks good. Never reuse cotter pins, always use a brand new one. And just bend it over, just like you're out on a Saturday night. Now we're gonna fill the diff back up with gear oil. Whenever you remove these drain plugs or fill plugs, it's always good to use a new, fresh crush washer. You can reuse the washers, but it's not recommended. I never do personally. These crush washers have like a rounded side and a flat side. The flat side goes towards the plug. The rounded side, the side that crushes, goes towards the differential. So I'm gonna get my fill plug in place. Now there is a torque spec for these. I never worry about it because I always just go by feel for drain plugs. I'm just gonna get it to that German spec of good and tight.
Okay, Herr Gut and Tight.
And that's gut and tight. Now we're gonna pump up the differential with some Redline 75W90 gear oil. Pump it up. Now you want to do this on level ground, because if you're not on level ground, you're not going to get an accurate fill of your differential. So right now I'm at a slant, so I'm just going to add a little bit, then I'm going to get it on level ground and finish the filling process. Basically, you just fill it to where gear oil starts spilling out of the bottom of the threads of the fill hole, and you're done. Okay, we have the front differential partially filled with gear oil. Now the next step is we're going to bleed the brakes. We're not going to show the bleeding of the brakes because we already have a video for that. If you click on the link above, you'll be able to see that video and how we go about properly bleeding the brakes on one of these rigs. All right, we're all done with this job. I would have to say it's a pretty labor-intensive job, and it's a pretty messy job, as you saw, with all the grease and grime that we had to clean up off all the parts. What I learned from tearing these things apart is that it looks like to me that, number one, the previous owner didn't exactly have the proper wheel bearing preload. Secondly, he didn't have the proper knuckle bearing preload. The other thing that was a total given, even before we started, is I knew that the driver's side inner axle seal wasn't working because there was a mixing of the grease and the knuckle and the gear oil from the differential. It was obvious those two were mixing, and I saw a drip on that driver's side. Dead giveaway that it wasn't working. When we got to the point of using the knuckle alignment tool, we're pretty sure we did everything right. We first got the proper preload, then we took our measurements to figure out how much thickness of shims we were going to need to get that preload once we put the knuckle back on. What we found on the passenger side is our calculations weren't exactly correct. We figured that we were going to need 1.5 millimeters of shims. It ends up to get the 15 pounds preload for that passenger side knuckle. We only needed 0.8 millimeters of shim thickness. So what we did is we ended up putting 0.5 on the top and 0.3 on the bottom, because with our alignment tool calculations, it showed that we needed more thickness of shims on the top as opposed to the bottom. So when we used the alignment tool on the driver's side, what we came up with for a shim thickness to get the proper preload, that was closer to being accurate. We came up with needing 1.5. It ends up, to get the proper preload, we ended up using 1.3. With the calculations on the driver's side, it pretty much showed that we should use most of the shim thickness on the top and pretty much next to nothing on the bottom. Now, with that said, I started second guessing whether or not the tool was giving us the accurate information, because most people don't have this tool. What they do is they figure out what shim thickness they need to get the proper knuckle preload, and then they just split the difference, trying to put an equal amount top and bottom, and then just guessing that that's going to be good. Most people get away with that, and they have no issues with alignment of the burr field joints, with the seal, with the free hub, and they have no problem. So I started thinking like, do I really want to put all the shim thickness on the top and nothing on the bottom? Thinking that I did use the tool properly and all my measurements with the caliper were spot on, I chickened out a little bit and I decided to split the difference on the driver's side, and I ended up putting 0.8 millimeter shim on the top and a 0.5 on the bottom. To speak further about that tool, I'm glad that I got the experience to use it and to learn about it, but after this job I've kind of formed the opinion that I don't really know if it's all that necessary, because we're talking about a very minuscule amount. Let's say, for example, I put all the shim thickness on the top, 1.3 on the top and nothing on the bottom. That would only made a difference of 0.5 millimeters because I ended up putting 0.8 on the top and 0.5 on the bottom. So thinking further on that, is 0.5 millimeters gonna make a big difference for the alignment of all those components? The axle, with the hub, with the seal, with the free hub. I really think that there's enough wiggle room that you can be off by 0.5 millimeters and there's not going to be any excessive binding, parts aren't going to break, you're not going to have any catastrophic failures with any of those components in your hub and in your axle. What I would like from some of you really experienced people with solid front axle vehicles, chime in and give me your opinion if whether you've just done this job many times and you haven't bothered with an alignment tool, or you have used an alignment tool and followed the exact procedure and got precise measurements and it worked out better for you. You have some type of data to share with us that yes, it's totally important to get that knuckle perfectly aligned with the axle housing so you don't put any undue strain on all those associated components. As an end result, Sean and I decided to just do a front end alignment in the driveway, just using a tape measure, because what Marlin Crawler and what other people have told me is that ideally you want the front end towed in like 1/8 of an inch. So we just used a tape measure. We thought we got it pretty close to towed into that amount, and then we took it for a drive. The first bump I hit, gnarly death wobble, crazy scary, brought it back to the house and had to make adjustments. What I learned when I went to the alignment shop originally is that when they towed it in perfectly, gnarly death wobble. When they towed it back out some, then the death wobble went away. And the guy explained it to me is that the front tires are kind of fighting themselves and basically keeping that death wobble from happening. But once the tires are straight, then that death wobble comes in. The front of my 85 4runner doesn't have a steering dampener. And I heard that a steering dampener could help with this issue, but I was told that that's only a band-aid for the problem. You can't just depend on a steering dampener fixing death wobble. It can help, but it's not the actual fix. We have an update for you. After I realized that the death wobble was still there after doing all this work, I decided to check some other possibilities of what can cause it. And I missed one big one, and that's the suspension components. I just assumed that everything was fine with the suspension, but I do remember the previous owner saying he had some work done to the front leaf springs. They added some shims. I decided to check the tightness of the U-bolt nuts on both leaf springs. I got on there with a 1/2-inch drive ratchet and socket, and I started tightening them, and they didn't feel all that tight to me. So then I looked up in my 85 Toyota factory service manual for the torque spec, and I learned it's 90 foot-pounds. I started tightening those 4 U-bolt nuts, and I was tightening and tightening and tightening for quite a while. They were way under spec. If I had to guess, they were probably maybe at half the spec, maybe 45 foot-pounds. So I did that on both sides, got them both up to spec. I did another driveway alignment with a tape measure, and I brought the toe back in pretty much straight from being towed out. I took it for a test drive, and lo and behold, the death wobble was pretty much gone. There is still an occasion where I'll hit a bump with one of the tires and the tires will start to go, but then it self-corrects and it stops. It doesn't go into that gnarly death wobble where I'm forced to hit the brakes and slow way down to get it to stop. It appears that most of my death wobble issue was due to improperly tightened leaf spring U-bolt nuts. Did the work that I just performed in this video help? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know for sure. But what I do know is after tightening those U-bolts up to the proper torque spec of 90 foot-pounds, the death wobble pretty much went away. I decided to go back to the original alignment shop that I took my rig to in Salinas, California. It's called Tire and Wheel World. And I had them recheck my work. I wasn't going to just let it go with driveway alignment with the tape measure. It ends up that I was pretty darn close with that driveway alignment. When they checked the numbers, I was just slightly towed out, which is within spec based off of how they align vehicles. I was pretty much like 0.7 millimeters towed out on one tire and 1.5 millimeters towed out on the other wheel. The guy adjusted it to where I'm pretty much towed out 1.5 millimeters out on each wheel. Now, you do remember me saying that I had heard that for rigs like mine that have big tires, they suggest being slightly towed in by 1/8 of an inch. But when I was messing with the toe at my house, when I adjusted the toe in a little bit more slightly, I noticed the wobble when I would hit bumps was worse, a little bit more towed in. So I think being right at that spot where I'm at now, 1.5 millimeters towed out, is good for my rig, and I'm not going to mess with it anymore. If you're in the California Bay Area and you're not too far away from Monterey County, I highly suggest using Tire and Wheel World in Salinas to get your alignment done, because these guys do good work and their prices are really fair. The original alignment only cost me $65. When I went back to have them recheck my work for my driveway alignment with the tape measure, they only charged me $50. In comparison, I was looking for an alignment shop that would do an alignment on this type of rig that's heavily modified with a high steer system, and I checked at 4-Wheel Parts in San Jose, and they wanted like $145 for a front end alignment. Now, that includes them inspecting the front end components and looking for problems with the front end of the vehicle, but I didn't need that. I didn't need somebody to tell me that the work that I already did was fine. That's a waste of money. I just needed a shop with their special machine to check my alignment. $65 sounded a hell of a lot better than $145. In the video description, I'll put a link to Tire and Wheel World, so if you are in the Monterey County area and you're in need of alignment, maybe you could use their shop. As a follow-up to all this work I'm doing on the front end of the rig, I am going to install a steering stabilizer, because all these solid front axle rigs, when they came from the factory, came with a steering stabilizer, and solid front axle rigs that are still being built now, like the Jeep Wrangler, they come with steering stabilizers. It sounds like it would be good to install one to help with the stabilization of the steering. Marlin Crawler sells one, so I bought one through Marlin Crawler, and I'm going to take it to the welder that I've used for many projects, and I'm going to have him weld on a bracket to the passenger side frame, and then I'm going to connect the steering stabilizer to the drag link, and I'll make a video for that too. So if you're in the need of installing a steering stabilizer on the front end of your heavily modified Toyota 4Runner with a high steer system, you'll know how to do it. With all that said, we thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. We'll be back with more videos. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you have any questions or comments, do that below. Take care. Bye-bye. Sick mods and sick brodozers. Ugh. He put it up for sale, so I finally got it, but I noticed I would get this really gnarly wobble with the front after I got the front end aligned. Yeah. So there's a preload on these bearings that you can set up to where you get them a little bit tighter than the normal factory spec, because I'm running 37-inch tires. You put it on the arm, that upper arm right there connected to the knuckle, the knuckle in there and that thing. I drove it like, I got it like 10 miles an hour. It was like, oh, it was like the front tire was just going like this, like crazy, like I would crash if I tried to go any faster. What Marlin Crawler and some other people say is that you actually want it slightly towed in, like about 1/8 of an inch, and then as you drive, the tires kind of straighten out a little bit. I'm hoping that after doing this, I could take it to an alignment shop, they tow it in a bit, and I could drive it, and it's not going to do that.
You're going to take it back to Salinas to that guy, or are you going to do it?
Yeah, I'm going to probably. So
I used to do a lot of work in Salinas.
Who knows? Worth a shot.
I don't know.
I didn't let that stop me from buying it, because you know, I'm going to maybe scratch it up and dent it up myself.
Maybe?
Yeah. So I just said, fuck it. You know, it's in good shape. The truck's in good shape. It came out of an old vehicle that was in storage for a long time. Yeah. You got a 22 RE motor. Yeah, so I have a feeling that it's because it's sat for so long that's what it is. It burns like a quart of oil in 500 miles.
That's too much.
Yeah. But I'm not at the point where I want to either rebuild the engine or do the valve stem seal. So for right now, I'm just going to drive it as is and see how it goes. But if that's the worst it does, it just burns some oil, I'll just leave it. You have to loosen the head bolts. And then you have to, so you may as well do, if you're going to do that, you may as well do the head gasket.
Right on.
So I don't know. I don't know at this point what I'm going to do. But
I'll do it now. All right. Well, we'll see you guys later. Good luck to you and sick mods. All right.
see ya.
Have a good
See ya,
one.
Bill.
It's an oldie but a goodie.